Late 1990s, Western country, not the US. Although the internet had been invented by then, most of the services we take for granted now simply did not exist yet. Cell phones and smartphones were still in the future. Note: inner city areas in my home country are not like inner city areas in the US. They are long-established suburbs with multi-bedroom homes owned by growing families, empty nesters and the recently retired. Small 1- and 2-bedroom cottages are dotted between them. Some cottages are split into duplexes, with additions and extensions to add more rooms, like kitchens and bathrooms. Cottages and duplexes are usually listed as cheap rentals. In the early 90s, I rented one side of a small cottage duplex. The landlord was an older guy, partly retired. He'd spent a number of years buying cottages and duplexes, renting them out and building a passive income stream for his retirement years. He spent his time puttering from property to property, mowing lawns and seeing to the maintenance, repairs. I simply wanted a home base. My job at that time required a lot of travel overseas, and it didn't make sense to just shove everything into storage until I was done with traveling. I would still need a place to stay when I was home, so the duplex worked for me. The rent was automatically taken from my bank account each month and deposited into his. I had similar arrangements for the utilities, etc. Every year the landlord and I would sit down and over coffee would catch each other up on the neighborhood news, stories from my travels, and the annual rent increase. It was a bit of a delicate negotiation, as I wanted to be fair, a national trait in my country, while he was taking into account that I was young and still building my career. So, money was often tight, especially in those early years. I had 9 good years in that duplex. I made friends with my neighbors, and folks knew if they needed some kind of help, and I was home, I was happy to assist them in various ways. Towards the end of my 9th year there, I flew home to firstly get some rest after several months of hopping around the globe, and have my annual chat with the landlord about the rent increase. We had ditched using a written lease after my 3rd year in the duplex. We'd gone to a month-to-month arrangement because I was never sure if some fabulous opportunity might land in my lap, suddenly requiring me to take up residence in another country. Not having to continue paying on a lease for a place I wasn't using made sense, economically. I had offered to find new tenants for him if such an opportunity ever actually happened. Having been home just a bare few days, I was looking forward to meeting with my landlord. I'd gotten to quite like him over the years, and I was a good tenant for him. Wear and tear on my side of the duplex was minimal, and being away as much as I was back then, he didn't have to do a lot beyond mowing the lawn. Well, surprise number 1, his eldest son knocked on my door the afternoon I was expecting the landlord. Surprise number 2, his father, my longtime landlord, had actually retired fully and signed over much of the business to his eldest son. Surprise number 3, eldest son had a very different mindset than that of his father. There was no friendly chat, no catching up, no storytelling. The biggest surprise, he was going to quadruple the rent. He justified it by stating property values had been going up around the area. More empty nesters and retired folks were selling up to property management companies and generally raising rents over the entire area. I missed most of his justification because I was in slack-jawed shock. When I told him I flat out couldn't afford the new rent, his reply was anything but nice. Then you have until the end of the month to move out. Now, I did check into some of his statements. Rents had been rising, but nothing like he suggested. Folks had been selling their big, multi-bedroomed homes to property management companies. Overall, rents were 50 to 75% higher compared to 5 years prior. Quadrupling the rent? I smelled something fishy. Couple of phone calls to the building permits people at City Hall, and I had my answer. What he intended was to use the inflated rent to help get bank financing to build more onto the duplex and turn into a bunch of high-priced apartments. I had a backyard more than large enough to put a whole other multi-bedroomed house onto, but city bylaws wouldn't permit it. So, this was his workaround. You couldn't build new homes into a backyard space, but you could build extensions and additions. Anyway, in just 20 days, I had found a new place to live, changed all the payment arrangements with the bank, got the new utilities turned on, and had moved everything I owned into the new place. Including several hundred books and their bookcases. I had 5 days to clean and spruce up the place before putting the keys into the mailbox. Yes, you could do things like that then. It really was a different time. Let the petty begin. I was rather salty about the massive jump on rent, and the reasons behind it, and having to move so quickly. I wanted a little petty payback. I have an ex-wife who trained to be an electrician. Long story for another day. I had helped her with some of the book learning. I knew enough to safely pull off my petty revenge. As I cleaned each room, I removed the faceplates on every PowerPoint and light switch. The ex had put in several new ones and I had helped. Making sure the electricity was off on my side at the mains, I undid the wires on the back of the PowerPoints and light switches. I then dipped the bare wires in clear nail polish. Once the polish was dry, sometimes requiring a second coat, I stuffed the wires as deeply into the wall as I could reach. The polish prevents arcing when I turn the power back on, and has to be removed when putting everything back together. Once everything was screwed back into place, there was no way to tell that the PowerPoints or light switches were now complete, powerless duds. It probably took less than 2 hours, over 4 days to do it all. But the petty continues. This duplex was in a city that is semi-tropical. Think Texas heat with Florida swamp levels of humidity. Residential AC didn't exist at all. A few folks had swamp coolers, but even they struggled to cool a room. It was midsummer when all of this went down. On the last day I had left, I stopped at my local fish store and picked up about 20 pounds of prawns, shrimp, to Americans. With no kind of AC, many homes were built with vents at the top of the walls opening up in the space under the roof. The attics aren't sealed, which allows air to flow through the space and blow out the hot air rising from the walls and venting out the openings. They're usually about 4 inches by 2. You know where this is going, don't you? I spent a delightful hour slipping fresh, green prawns into each and every vent on my side of the duplex. All 20 pounds of them. I left the keys in the mailbox as I had been instructed to do. Several hours later, I was on a plane, headed for another long trip overseas. The aftermath. After my return, I called my former next-door neighbor. A lovely old lady whose cat had taken a liking to sleeping on my bed whenever I was home. Her house was higher than the duplex, and when the front door and windows were open, which was pretty common back then due to having no AC, she could see into most of the house as well as whatever was going on around the front door. Her first words were, "What did you do?" She assumed I had done something, but I never admitted to anything. She then proceeded to tell me about the saga that ensued after I had left for the final time. Eldest son waited several days before showing up at the duplex for the first time. He casually opened the door, took maybe 2 steps inside and dashed right back out again. He spent the next several minutes bent over, emptying his stomach near the fence line. He left. Less than an hour later, 2 cars pull into the driveway. Eldest son and my former old guy landlord. Old landlord gets within 4 feet of the still open door, takes a wee sniff, and falls on his ass laughing his head off. Eldest son looks kinda pssed. Very dramatically, he grabs lungs full of air, dashes inside and opens a couple of windows before running back out again. He has to do this several times to open all the windows and the back door as well. Old landlord goes off in fresh gales of laughter every time eldest son does his deep breathing routine prior to his next dash indoors. Several hours later, eldest son locks both front and back doors, leaving the windows open. From what my former neighbor could see, it appears the smell hadn't abated at all. 10 days later, eldest son shows up again, with someone who looks like they are in construction. As noted by my former neighbor, construction guy walks into the house, turning pale in the process, walks around, looks at the bottom of the walls, and then exits. Sharp-eared neighbor hears him tell eldest son, all the baseboards will have to be replaced. I'm not sure we'll ever get all the stink out though. Eldest son has a fit on the spot, while construction guy just shrugs his shoulders. 2 more days pass, a small crew of construction types arrive. Eldest son lets them into the duplex. Using crowbars, they start pulling off the baseboards. There is much swearing, especially as they have to remove and clean up the leftover, rotting carcasses of all those prawns. They are less than an hour in when they strike a problem. None of their power tools will work. Not a zip. They tried different power points and even made sure the power was on at the mains. Nope, nothing happening. Construction crew leaves while eldest son has another fit on the stairs. Following week, an electrician and his assistant turn up. Eldest son lets them into the duplex. It doesn't take long for them to discover my other bit of pettiness. But there is a problem. To get at the wires and reattach them to various power points and light switches, parts of the walls, mostly the stinky baseboards, have to be removed and the festering mess behind them needs to be cleaned up before the electrician can, or will, do his job. A very loud argument ensues. Apparently, the problem is the construction crew need their power tools, but the electrician doesn't feel it is his job to remove the smelly baseboards nor clean 20 pounds of rotting shellfish out of the space. Impasse. From what my former neighbor told me, it eventually took over 4 months to make things right in the duplex. There were a number of disagreements over who should be doing what in respect to cleaning, repairs and rebuilding. Word at the local coffee shop was it ended up costing eldest son more than a year's worth of quadrupled rent, and he never got his bank financing either. A full decade later, he actually sold the duplex. The new owners immediately began building extensions that eventually grew to be several apartments. I've seen the satellite pictures myself on Google Maps.